Is Pete Alonso destined to come back to the Mets? Are they going to aggressively pursue Garrett Crochet in the trade market? I'll talk about all the latest rumors swirling around the Mets at the winter meetings on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
For all you amazing Mets fans, you're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, we are in day 2 of the Juan Soto era. Congratulations again to all you Mets fans out there. We're going to talk about some rumors today. And the first thing I want to do is parse through David Stearns' first media session and some of the comments that he made. And I think once Soto signed, all eyes turned to Pete Alonso. Obviously, David Stearns was going to be asked about it. And I really think his answers indicate that the Mets are clearly in the market to bring Pete Alonso back. He pretty much said as much. He said, we'd love to have Pete back. When asked about if the Mets had the money to sign Pete, because they just spent $765 million, although David Stearns could not comment on Juan Soto because that contract is not official. It's not approved through the league office yet, so you can't, discuss those deals. It's the same thing with Clay Holmes, or it was for this media session. Clay Holmes did get announced after he talked to the media, so now tomorrow he can speak on Holmes a little bit, but this is common practice. It's just one of those things where everybody knows what happened, and same thing with Carlos Mendoza when he was talking to the media today. They're just not allowed to specifically address the players that aren't officially on the roster yet. Again, though, as it relates to Pete, again, he said, we'd love to have Pete back. And when asked about having the money, he said that ownership has consistently demonstrated that there is going to be resources when we need them. When asked about Mark Vientos, he said, Mark did a tremendous job for us at third. And right now, we certainly see him as our third baseman. He was asked also if Mark Vientos was going to get some time at first base this offseason just to prepare for that possibility of sliding over. And David Stearns sort of, pushed that aside too, said, no, Mark Vientos is solely focused at third base right now. If we have to change that at some point this offseason, we can have that discussion with him. All that sort of indicates, right, that Pete Alonso might be the Mets first baseman again and Vientos would be at third. Or they're going to get another option at first base. The thought of Vientos sliding to first and the Mets staying internal, I think that is off the table, because when asked about Brett Baty, he said Brett did a great job last year of creating some positional versatility for us. Said he can play second, and the outfield. Really talked about them being very comfortable with his ability to play second base. When Carlos Mendoza was asked about Brett Baty today, he mentioned the idea of having a left-handed bat that can play in multiple positions, another utility man, always a valuable player on the roster. So all of these things are sort of aligned with the idea of Pete Alonso coming back. When he was even asked about valuing defense and offense at first base, he wasn't asked specifically about Pete, but somebody asked David Stearns about that give and take when it came to the first base position. They said that they want a mix of both. It's not just that they want an offensive-minded player, but he even continued to say, without being asked about Pete, I thought Pete did a good job for us there this past year. He talked about how good Pete Alonso was around the bag, helping the other infielders out, and basically signing off on the fact that they view Pete Alonso as a passable, good first baseman, which, obviously the metrics don't like Pete Alonso, and a lot of people just look at the metrics and they say, oh, he's not good because of his outs above average, or defensive runs saved, or because you watched him botch a double play turn. And yes, Pete Alonso is not good throwing the baseball, but I think what matters most for your first baseman, Pete Alonso is good at. And again, all of these comments sort of point me in the direction to say, yeah, the Mets are looking at Pete Alonso right now as their best possible hitter that they could add to continue to build out this lineup. And John Heyman, on one of his hits today, was asked about the Pete Alonso situation, and he talked about this idea of the Mets need to form a duo similar to Judge and Soto, being able to give Soto that protection that Aaron Judge just did this past season, It's been mentioned that was one of the concerns that Juan Soto had about coming to the Mets, was just what the lineup would look like around him. And you would imagine that at some point, the idea of bringing back Pete Alonso was broached in those conversations. I really feel like a deal is going to get done. We just have to see what Pete Alonso's market's going to be. And I'm sure maybe, Pete is taking some meetings with other teams to gauge that market. And hopefully these sides can hammer out a contract. But again, all indications at this point to me are still pointing towards the Mets re-signing Pete Alonso, because there's just not a lot of good alternatives. There's really not. Yes, you can say, oh, go sign Christian Walker. And I think everyone always gets so enamored by that option 2 in the free agent market. And the perfect example, 2 examples that come to my mind when it comes to the Mets and getting that plan B, that tier B free agent at a position. One of them, I'll never forget it. I wanted the Mets to sign Matt Holliday years ago. And I was on a Disney vacation with my family. I don't know how old I was. I was probably like early teens, because I remember I at least had a cell phone that had some type of connection to something where I got the news on my phone. And I felt like it was an ominous, it's such a tough word for me. Ominous, an ominous place to be when I got the notification, because I was in line at the Tower of Terror when Jason Bay signed with the Mets. And I just thought, man, that's a horrible deal. And it was. Another example of signing the tier B free agent, James McCann was the second best catcher on the board to JT Realmuto. How did that work out for the Mets? So I hate this idea of Christian Walker. Yes, I know Christian Walker's numbers are good. I know he's a better defensive first baseman than Pete Alonso, but I also know he's going to be 34 next year. And if you're concerned about Pete Alonso in years, 4, 5, and 6, or even beyond that of the contract that he signs when he'll be 34 years old, why are you all in on a 34-year-old first baseman? Despite how good he looked the past, couple seasons, he also looked great playing in general obscurity in Arizona. So I'm not in on Christian Walker, and I don't think, or I hope the Mets aren't either. The other options in the market we've talked about, they just aren't fantastic. It is a lot better than third base. You have the prospect next year, too, of potentially signing Vladimir Guerrero Jr., so you could keep it open, sign a stopgap like Carlos Santana that would give you the flexibility to play with things. And if Baty is good, you could, make some moves in season. Again, I still feel like the most likely outcome is going to be Pete Alonso will be back with the Mets, but we'll see. Now, when it comes to the pitching side of things, David Stearns was asked, do you think you will acquire another starting pitcher that you would guarantee a starting spot? Now, this is pretty interesting because we don't always think about or really read about that side of free agency. But guys are guaranteed a certain role. They might be guaranteed, if it's a position player, a certain number of plate appearances. And for pitchers, a lot of these guys, if you're talking to Walker Buehler, he doesn't want to end up in the bullpen, right? So they definitely have to broach that discussion. They can't just bring in 8 starting pitchers on free agent contracts and expect that they're all going to fit in a 5 or 6 man rotation. What David Stearns said to that question, he said, I think we have room for that, but I don't think it's a necessity. When he talked about Jose Butto, he said that they're going to stretch him out, and they said it's always easier to shorten up a pitcher after they've been stretched out. So Jose Butto, Paul Blackburn, Tyler McGill, they're all going to prepare to be starting pitchers. But he pretty much alluded to the fact that they're all going to go into next year in a similar bucket as guys that will go into camp vying for a starting spot, but could all end up in the bullpen. Or for Tyler McGill, he could end up in the minor leagues, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the final segment today, as we'll get into a little Sean Manaea discussion, but that is a little bit later on in the show. When it comes to where the Mets are at right now with their rotation, you got Senga, Montas, Peterson, Clay Holmes is likely going to get a crack at being a starter, and then Blackburn, Butto, McGill. So obviously you could add a starter or two still. It just depends on what's on the market. My read, based on what's been out there from the Mets' interest in Garrett Crochet, which again we're going to talk about in a minute, reuniting with Sean Manaea, potentially signing a Walker Buehler, I think they will sign at least one more bona fide starter. I think there's a chance that the next starter they add is the best one they will acquire this winter. But David Stearns talked about canvassing the market, finding all possible avenues to getting better. I think the Mets might add some depth starters as well that can go right to AAA, and they already did. They signed Yuhi Sako to a minor league deal. He's a 25-year-old who pitched to a 3.23 ERA with 92 strikeouts to only 28 walks and 103 innings in the independent leagues this past year. Obviously, this is just a flyer, but the 25-year-old pitcher has got potentially some upside that can start the year in AAA and give you some additional depth. So the Mets are going to make moves like that. When it comes to the bullpen, David Stearns said over the course of the offseason, they will likely do that as far as adding proven relievers. So you just sort of have to wait and see how that market develops. And sometimes there are so many options that it could develop a little bit slower. You never know. Maybe the Mets decide to get really aggressive and trade for one of these relievers that's on the market, whether that be a Ryan Helsley or a Devin Williams. Although considering the fact that those guys will be free agents after this upcoming season, they might not want to give up that level of a trade package now in the offseason for one of those guys. Last little note I have before we talk about Garrett Crochet. Ronnie Mauricio. Apparently, he has had a really good last couple of weeks. David Stearns said is the best Ronnie progression that they've had in some time, and he has begun baseball activities. He likely will not play winter ball, which is where he got hurt last year, and the goal is to get him into spring training healthy, ready to compete for a job. But honestly, the way David Stearns sort of answered that side of the question, talking about the fact that he hasn't competed in over a year at this point, it really feels like Ronnie Mauricio is going to start the year in Syracuse to get his legs under him, to get into a lot of games, to play every single day. And he is obviously a high upside player that could factor into the mix when somebody goes down with an injury or someone's not performing. At some point this season, Ronnie Mauricio does represent some very good depth in AAA. But the biggest name that the Mets have been connected to, especially as far as not bringing back a guy like Pete Alonso, just an external, completely free agent, or actually in this case, a trade candidate, is Garrett Crochet. He's clearly going to get traded, and The Athletic is reporting that the Mets are one of the most aggressive teams in pursuing him right now. What does that all mean? I'll talk about it in the next segment. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL. It's all in one place. So you get a hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats, the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And remember, you want to make sure you win that first $5 bet because you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports. You can check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Next goal is to get to 12,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, let's talk about this story on Garrett Crochet. It was reported by Ken Rosenthal and Will Salmon of The Athletic, very credible reporters. And here's how they open up the story. After engaging in a spirited bidding war for prize free agent Juan Soto, the New York Mets and New York Yankees are among the teams vying for the best starting pitcher available via trade. Chicago White Sox left-hander Garrett Crochet, sources briefed on the talks say. Now, the next paragraph is the Philadelphia Phillies and Boston Red Sox are among the other teams interested in Crochet, but the Mets and Yankees were the most aggressive suitors as of Monday, according to two sources briefed on the White Sox discussions. No deal with any club was considered closed. Now, I want to first address this report. Is it credible? Absolutely. Could the Mets and the Yankees have been the most aggressive on the phone on Monday to figure out a Garrett Crochet trade? Yeah, they've been pretty busy with Juan Soto the last couple of weeks. The fact that the Phillies and Red Sox are mentioned, to me, that more indicates that this could have been a leak from the White Sox side, where they didn't leak any wrong information. The Yankees and the Mets absolutely could have been on the phone trying to figure out what the market is on Crochet, what it's going to take. But the fact that the Phillies and the Red Sox are mentioned and now they're trying to push this narrative of the Mets and the Yankees, it could just be trying to drive the price on the Phillies or the Red Sox, trying to create some pressure on those teams who are and have been in on Crochet because the Phillies and the Red Sox both of them likely have a better trade package they can put forward to land Crochet than the Mets or the Yankees. They have the position player prospects that ideally the White Sox would want. It's Carl Crawford's son from the Phillies. The Red Sox have, a handful, and there's no way that they're going to trade Roman Anthony, but I think Marcelo Meyer is one. There's Tristan Casas could be an option too, but it's clear that those are the teams that probably have the better package to give the White Sox, but maybe they've been trying to hold their prospects back, trying to hold their best blue chippers away from this negotiation. And this story could be a way to try to pry some of those pieces out of those teams. This is going to be the make or break trade for the White Sox offseason. So I don't think it's going to happen quickly. And I honestly think Chris Getz is terrified of making a bad trade because he made bad trades at the deadline. He traded Eric Fetty and Michael Kopech and did not get a great return. And that trade basically resulted in the Dodgers winning the World Series in a lot of respects because it turned into a 3-team trade. Tommy Edman ended up on the Dodgers, as did Kopech, and those two guys were vital to the Dodgers in that playoff run. So I really think that the White Sox are going to be super cautious and they're going to be taking forever to make a decision. And with the way that the starting pitching market on free agents is moving, I don't know if the Mets have time to really wait around for it. So that's the first side of this thing where it doesn't make sense. Now, with all that said, what is attractive about Garrett Crochet? Okay, he's estimated to make $2.9 million in arbitration this upcoming season. He's in his second year of arbitration. He'll have one more year of arbitration after this because he was a reliever for the majority of his career and not a closer. He is going to be cheap until he hits free agency. And there's been a lot of reports that he might get a contract extension with this new team so that he could get paid more, commensurate for his value as one of the best pitchers in baseball right now. But with that said, it still would be a very team-friendly extension just based on the fact that you have these 2 cheap years that you can leverage to sort of smooth out the contract. So maybe it is a 4 or 5 year deal where Crochet is able to still hit the market at a young age. He's 25 right now. He'll be 26 in June. So in 4 or 5 year deal, he can still hit the market at around 30 years old. You can buy out a couple years of free agency, but you can get him at a much better rate than you're going to get signing a Corbin Burns or a Max Fried in this market. Now, how good is Garrett Crochet? He pitched to a 3.58 ERA this past year, but that doesn't tell the whole story because he had an atrocious defense, the worst team in MLB history playing behind him. You look at his expected ERA and his expected FIP. These are stats that take away the defense behind you. It just focuses on what you did as a pitcher. His expected ERA was 2.83. His expected FIP, which is fielding independent pitching, was 2.38. He had 209 strikeouts and 146 innings pitched. Guys with high strikeouts do very well when it comes to xFIP. It's a metric. He had the best xFIP in all of baseball among starting pitchers who had at least 130 innings pitched. So that includes Paul Skeens, Chris Sale, Tyler Glasnow, Tarek Skubal. He had a better xFIP than all of them. His expected ERA was 8th best. His 12.88 strikeout per 9 rate was the best mark in Major League Baseball. His walk rate of 2.03 was top 20. So really good when it comes to his control. You look at his strikeout percentage minus his walk percentage, 29.6% was the best mark in baseball, nearly 3% better than Paul Skeens, and just over 3% better than Chris Sale, over 4% better than Tarek Skubal. You're talking about a guy in Skeens that pitched at an absurd level. If he had the volume, he might have taken that Cy Young from Chris Sale. And you're talking about the 2 Cy Youngs that he was better at when it came to what you can control most as a pitcher, striking out a lot of guys, not walking many. So this guy's an unbelievable pitcher. But that's why I have not loved this idea all off season. Not because I don't want to see him in a Mets uniform, because I feel like it's going to take a haul to get him. And I don't think the Mets are in a position to trade a haul for Garrett Crochet right now. Going back to the article in The Athletic, it said the Mets, after beating out the Yankees for Soto, also would appear to have the edge for Crochet based on the young talent they could offer. The White Sox ideally want major league ready hitters, and though shortstop Colson Montgomery is their top position prospect, and he had a bad year. People familiar with the Sox farm system say the team still needs better players at the up-the-middle positions, such as shortstop, second base, and center field. They continue to talk about Jet Williams, Luis Angel Acuna, and Brett Baty as some of the potential trade chips the Mets have in this deal. They also mentioned that the Yankees did not have prospects that the White Sox wanted at the deadline, and they likely, assuming the Yankees aren't going to trade Jason Dominguez, and now that they don't have Juan Soto, why would they? It appears like the Yankees might not have the prospects to get this thing done, right? And the Mets might have better prospects. But with that said, let's just talk about the three names mentioned there: Jet Williams, Luis Angel Acuna, and Brett Baty. There's Mets fans that are thinking, would I do that deal? Maybe not. I love the idea of Acuna. I love Jet Williams. Personally, I would do that deal in a vacuum. I think that is a fair trade. It's honestly an underpay for the Mets. Even though, as we get to the Mets side of it, I still don't love it. But here's my whole point of this. That would be absolutely at least fair value. Like I said, probably undervalue for the White Sox. What are they getting in that trade? They're getting a top 100 prospect in baseball in Jet Williams, but a guy that's coming off of a lost year. They're getting a prospect in Luis Angel Acuna that just posted a 654 OPS in AAA. Yes, we can all love Acuna, and I talked about the comparison of him and Tommy Edman on a show, last week or the week before that. I really am growing to love the idea of Acuna on this 2025 Mets team because I think he could bring so much to their bench, and I think he has an outside shot to take that starting center fielder job from Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor at some point next year if he can hit. But it's still a 654 OPS with a huge amount of volume in AAA. That's not the most attractive trade chip. That's not necessarily a top-tier blue chip prospect the same way he was when the Mets traded for him when he was hitting over 300 with an OPS, I think was in the 900s in the Rangers farm system in AA. It's just not the same value as where he was at a year and a half ago. Then you have Brett Baty, who has a career 607 OPS in the big leagues. Now, if you wanted to talk yourself into it, if you're a White Sox fan, you say, all right, well, Jet Williams is a legit blue chip prospect. Acuna can start at shortstop immediately, and Brett Baty can be your starting third baseman, and you see what you have in those guys. But I think the Mets still probably have to add on to it, and I would look at it as, all right, we have two players in Baty and Acuna that could help you in 2025, and they'll be cheap. You have a glaring hole long-term in center field. And you're giving up two of your potential options to fill it in Acuna and Jet Williams. You have a team now that's going to have Brandon Nimmo in left and Juan Soto in right for the foreseeable future. You need to have an elite defensive center fielder, and ideally one that can hit. The Mets' best chance at getting that is either Jet Williams or Carson Bench, and I would not want to forfeit 6 years of Jet Williams for 2 years of Garrett Crochet when Garrett Crochet also just had a massive spike in innings and could be an injury risk if you don't sign him to an extension and Garrett Crochet blows out. Well, now you just traded all these guys for absolutely nothing. So with that said, if you do make this trade, you better sign it to an extension. But I think there's teams out there that are going to strike out on the top of the market, whether that is the Red Sox. Maybe the Phillies are not even shopping at the top of the market when it comes to, I think they wouldn't be when it comes to free agents. I think they would be in on Crochet because he comes cheap. But again, maybe it's the Red Sox. Who knows? Maybe I'm trying to think of other teams that have the prospects to do it. But the bottom line is, at some point, I feel like the White Sox should get an offer better than what the Mets are willing to stomach giving up. And I don't think they have time right now to spend their entire offseason pinned to the hopes of Garrett Crochet when there's free agents they can just sign now. You just gave out a contract that's more than $750 million. Keep on spending. Find the right deals and keep on spending because that is your cheat code. And if you really want to have that sustainable winner that can be a little more affordable around a $51 million player in a couple years, you need to preserve that prospect capital. That's why I'm still sort of against the Garrett Crochet trade. With that said, if the Mets pull it off, will I be thrilled to watch Garrett Crochet pitch next year? Absolutely. This guy is on a short list of the best left-handed pitchers in baseball going into next season. He absolutely could win a Cy Young. He's that dominant. I just don't know if he's going to actually be able to do it over 180 innings pitched. And there's just a lot of details of it that would scare me. But we'll see what the Mets do here. I want to talk about the other lefty that they're clearly interested in, and that is just bringing back Sean Manaea. Is that the right path for the Mets? Are they, rumored to be in on him? We'll go through that in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so are the Mets in on Sean Manaea? Andy Martino certainly makes it seem like the Mets are really picking up some steam when it comes to their pursuit of re-signing Sean Manaea. On SNY, he said that he's picking up on some optimism on Manaea coming back to the Mets. He said that after the season, his read was that the Mets loved Manaea loved them, but most likely the bidding was going to get past where they'd be comfortable. But he said they love him so much, they might just bring him back. He said that Manaea is getting 4-year offers. If it does go to 5-6 years for a pitcher that's going to be 33 next year, the Mets probably won't go down that road. But if it does stay at 4 years, the Mets might just bring back Sean Manaea. And to me, if the options are Garrett Crochet, who has that incredibly high ceiling, I get it. But he only has one season as a starting pitcher in the big leagues. To Sean Manaea, who has a long career as a starting pitcher in the big leagues, who fits in your clubhouse like a glove, who is best friends with a new, buy low project in Frankie Montas that you want to get the most out of, who just thrived in New York and just gave you 180 innings plus good innings in the playoffs. I think it pushed it almost to 200 innings, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was like 199 and change, I think. Even I think it was a couple outs from 200 innings, honestly. But I'd rather have Sean Manaea for money than Garrett Crochet for your best possible prospects, potentially. Yes, it's going to cost something, but 4 years of Sean Manaea after what we just watched, I don't think that would necessarily be a bad deal. I really don't. And you plug Manaea into this rotation, I think you're pretty set. The Mets have also been linked to Walker Buehler. I think what would be really great is that the Mets just continue to spend aggressively on starting pitching and then allow that starting pitching to help their bullpen. What do I mean by that? Let's just say you sign Sean Manaea to a 4-year deal. Maybe it's 4 for 100. Or who knows? Maybe the Mets actually decided to give him a 5th year because they had to give him $100 million anyway. And they just decided to make it a 5-year deal so that the AAV is less. Whatever the contract is. Let's just say Sean Manaea comes back to the Mets. And it might not be $100 million. I'm just looking at what Luis Severino got, what Usei Kikuchi got, which was $21 million per. I think he's going to get at least $21 million. It's 4 years. Maybe it's 4 for 85. We'll see. With that said, let's just say whatever the number is, the Mets sign Sean Manaea, and then they end up getting Walker Buehler on a 1-year deal. Nice little pillow contract for Buehler. Might be $17-18 million, but they really sell Buehler on the fact that the Mets are the organization that can take him and get him back to his old self. Now you're looking at your rotation. You got Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea, Frankie Montas, David Peterson, and Walker Buehler as your 1 through 5. And Buehler has the potential to jump all the way up to the top of your rotation if he gets back to what he was pre-Tommy John surgery. Frankie Montas, also a guy that could be a top of the rotation guy if he gets back to his previous success before shoulder surgery. I've talked about those two guys on this show in recent episodes. Both of them were at their best in 2021, where I think Buehler was 2nd in Cy Young and Montas was 6th. Obviously, Montas was in the AL, Buehler was in the NL. But those two guys as buy low projects, I think, are perfect for the Mets. Now, could you just go with them and not sign Manaea? You could. I think Mets fans would be a little bit concerned about the rotation, but you would still have Kodai Senga, Frankie Montas, David Peterson, Walker Buehler, and still Clay Holmes that they're reportedly going to start as a starting pitcher in spring training and see how that goes. You still have McGill, Blackburn, and Budo. But if you sign Manaea and Buehler, Now you got a 1 through 5 that doesn't even need Holmes. And if you really like what you see from Clay Holmes, you can just open the year at the 6-man rotation. You can get really creative with it, honestly. And you could have both Holmes and Buehler in some type of funky role as far as guys that can be in the bullpen but can start. You can have them in the bullpen some as you are going through the early part of the season where there's typically more off days. Granted, I would say if you're really going to try this Clay Holmes project, you should probably just keep him on a starter schedule. But they can figure these things out. What are the chances that the Mets would make it through spring training with all 6 of their guys healthy in Senga, Manaea, Montas, Peterson, Buehler, and Holmes? Likely one of them is going to go down. You'd have a 5-man rotation. You could have someone like Paul Blackburn in your bullpen able to make spot starts when needed to give the guys the extra rest they need. And then throughout the year, you'd figure it out. But to me, that would be the ideal outcome for this rotation, would be to get Manaea and Walker Buehler, because I also think there's a world where it just makes the most sense, despite the fact that you sign Clay Holmes with this idea of maybe making him a starting pitcher. It makes a lot of sense to just have him in the bullpen. And yeah, you can try it out. But if you go into spring training, Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea, Montas, Peterson, Buehler, they're all healthy. They're all ready to go. And Paul Blackburn looks pretty good as well. Well, you know what? Clay Holmes could be your 8th inning guy. And you're good. So to me, it really is a way to satisfy the need for a ton of starting pitching depth, but also to help your bullpen, because let's just say that is the path. Your bullpen could be Edwin Diaz, Clay Holmes, Daniel Nunez, Reed Garrett, and Jose Butto. That's 5 guys that you should trust before you even get to signing another free agent. And then you'd have Paul Blackburn likely as a long man, swing man type that's in that pen as well. So that's 6 guys. And then those other 2 spots, typically, you just cycle different arms through them. Obviously, I think all of us would love the Mets to go out, get an established reliever. At some point, we'll talk about who those options are. It's such a tough market to decide that I keep putting it off. And there's been news and things that have stopped me from doing that show about relievers I like the Mets to target. But I will get to it at some point, I promise. Likely not until the end of the winter meetings, because I expect some transactions to happen to give us some topics over the next few days here. But I would love it if the Mets would re-sign Sean Manaea and sign Walker Buehler. And, of course, bring back Pete Alonso. They did all those things to me. I'd be completely satisfied with the Mets offseason if they made those 3 transactions. Alonso, Manaea, Buehler, okay. Again, I wouldn't even necessarily care if they didn't sign one of the top relievers. They don't have to waste money on Tanner Scott or Jeff Hoffman or Carlos Estevez or even David Robertson, who I do like to come back. I would love to see what we were promised in 2023, the Edwin Diaz, David Robertson tandem. I wanted it. Never happened. But if you were able to sign both Manaea and Buehler and eventually get to the point where Clay Holmes is just your premier reliever addition, like, you're golden. You're golden. Now you're just scouring the market for those gems that David Stearns loves to find that can be in Syracuse, that could always come up and pitch out of the bullpen, or be this year's Jose Iglesias off the bench at some point. You can figure out the rest of the market and not have to spend at the top dollar amount anymore if you just get those 3 players. So we'll see what the Mets do. We'll see if anything happens during winter meetings. My hope, more than anything, honestly, is that Pete Alonso is going to sign during this winter meetings, and that's just settled. The Mets could slow play it, though, and they might get a better deal out of Pete Alonso if they do that. I guess they just have to get a gauge on his market, because it might develop slower than a Sean Manaea, where maybe Manaea becomes the priority right now because a lot of teams are bidding, and you might be able to get Pete at a discount later on. That is your rumor update for the winter meetings. I do believe that I figured a little something out with the Wi-Fi. So I think I should be able to stream after any major transaction that happens tomorrow. We'll see. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you will know if and when I go live. If you are listening on the audio side, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel. Covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team. league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.